Chapter 6 of Book 5 of Physics by Aristotle, translated by Thomas Taylor. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 6. But one motion is predicated in many ways, for the one is multifariously predicated. Motion, therefore, is one in genus according to the figures of category, for lation with all lation is one motion in genus, but change according to quality differs in genus from lation, and motion is one in species, when, being one in genus, it is also in an individual species. Thus there are differences of colour, and therefore denigration and dealbation differ in species. Hence every dealbation will be the same in species with every dealbation, and every denigration with every denigration, but not with every dealbation. On this account, dealbation is one motion in species with every dealbation. But if there are certain things which are at the same time both genera and species, it is manifest that there will be, in a certain respect, one motion in species, but simply that there will not be one in species, as, for instance, discipline, if science is a species of hypolepsis, but the genus of the sciences. Some one, however, may doubt if there is one motion in species when the same thing is changed from the same to the same, as, for instance, one point from this place to that, again and again. But if there is, circulation will be the same with rectilinear motion, and rolling with walking. Or is it determined that motion is different if that in which it is different in species? But the circular is different in species from the right-lined. Thus, therefore, there is one motion both in genus and species, but the motion is simply one, which is one in essence and in number. And what a motion of this kind is will be manifest from division, for there are three things in number about which we say there is one motion, viz., that which, and in which, and when. I say that which, because it is necessary that there should be something which is moved, as, for instance, man or gold, and this must be moved in something, as in place, or in passive quality. There must also be when it is moved, for everything is moved in time. But of these, that motion is one in genus or in species is caused by the thing in which it is moved, but the coherence is the effect of time, and that it is simply one is produced by all these, for that in which the motion is ought to be one and an individual, as, for instance, form. And again, the when, as that the time should be one and uninterrupted. It is also necessary that the thing moved should be one, not according to accident, as when that which is white becomes black, and coriscus walks, and coriscus and that which is white are one, but according to accident. Nor according to that which is common, for two men may at the same time be cured by the same method of cure, for instance, of an ophthalmy. But this is not one motion simply, but one in species. Suppose, however, that Socrates is changed in quality according to the same species of change in quality, but in another time, and again in another. If then it is possible that what is corrupted may again become one in number, this motion also will be one. But if this is not possible, there will indeed be the same motion, but not one motion. There is also a doubt similar to this, whether there is one health essentially, and, in short, whether habits and passions are in essence in bodies, for the possessors of these appear to be moved and to flow. If, however, the health is one and the same which was in the morning and now is, why, when a man recovers the health which he had lost, is not this one and the same in number? For the reason is the same, except that it differs in this, that if two things are, on this account, as one in number, it is also necessary that habits should be one in number. For one energy in number is of one thing in number. But if habit is one, perhaps it may not yet appear to some one that there is also one energy. For when a man ceases to walk, there is no longer walking, but when he again walks, there will be walking. If, therefore, there is one and the same energy, one and the same thing may often perish, and often exist. These doubts, however, are foreign from the present speculation. But since all motion is continued, it is also necessary that the motion, which is simply one, should be continued, if all motion is divisible. And if it is continued, it is one. For not every motion can be continuous to every motion, as neither can anything else to anything else. But those things only are continued whose extremes are one. Extremes, however, do not belong to some things, but not to others, being different in species and homonymous. For how can the extremity of a line and of walking touch each other, or become one? Motions, therefore, may be coherent, which are neither the same in species nor in genus. For some one who is running may immediately have a fever, and lation adheres like a lamp from succession, but is not continued. For it is admitted that the continued is that the extremes of which are one, so that motions adhere and are successive because time is continued, but they are continued because the extremes of both become one. Hence it is necessary that the motion, which is simply continued and one, should be the same in species, and of one thing, and in one time. In one time, indeed, that a cessation of motion may not intervene. For in a cessation of motion it is necessary to rest. Between many motions, therefore, and not one motion, there is rest, so that if any motion is stopped by permanency, it is neither one, nor a continued motion, but it is stopped if time intervenes. But that motion, which is not one in species, cannot be called one, though there should not be an intermission of time. For the time indeed is one, but the motion is different in species. For it is necessary that the motion, which is one, should also be one in species, but it is not necessary that this should be simply one. And thus we have shown what the motion is, which is simply one. Farther still, the motion also is said to be one which is perfect, whether it be according to genus, or according to species, or according to essence, just as in other things the perfect and the whole are of one thing. Sometimes, however, though motion is imperfect, it is said to be one if it be only continued. Again, after another manner, besides the modes which have been enumerated, the motion is said to be one which is equable. For the motion which is anomalous in a certain respect does not appear to be one, but rather that which is equable, as a right line, for the anomalous is divisible. They appear, however, to differ in the same manner as the more and the less. But in all motion there is either the equable or the anomalous, for it may be equably varied and borne along in an equable space, as for instance in a circle or a right line, and the like also may be said concerning increase and diminution. But the difference of the inequability is at one time in that in which a thing is moved. For it is impossible that motion should be equable upon a magnitude which is not equable, as for instance the motion in a fractured or spiral line, or in any other magnitude, every part of which does not accord with every part. But at another time the inequability is neither in the where, nor in the when, nor in that to which the motion tends, but in the manner. For sometimes it is defined by swiftness and slowness. For that motion, the celerity of which is the same, is equable, but that of which the celerity is not the same is anomalous. Hence, swiftness and slowness are neither species nor differences of motion, because they are consequent to all motions which are different in species. Hence, neither do gravity and levity, which tend to the same thing, differ in species, as of earth to itself, or of fire to itself. Anomalous motion, therefore, is one because it is continued, but it is less one than equable motion, which indeed happens to fractured lation, but the less has always a mixture of the contrary. If, however, every motion which is one may be equable and not equable, motions which do not adhere according to species cannot be one and continued. For how can the motion be equable which is composed from change according to quality and lation? For it would be necessary that they should accord. Chapter 7. Again, it is requisite to define what kind of motion is contrary to motion, and after the same manner concerning permanency. But in the first place we must determine whether the motion which is from the same is contrary to that motion which is to the same, as for instance, whether the motion which is from health is contrary to that which tends to health, as appears to be the case with generation and corruption, or whether this is true of the motion which is from contraries, so that the motion which is from health is contrary to that which is from disease. Or if this is the case with the motion that tends to contraries, so that the motion tending to health is contrary to that which tends to disease, or if the motion from a contrary to a contrary is contrary to that from a contrary to a contrary, as for instance, if the motion from health to disease is contrary to the motion from disease to health. For it is necessary that there should either be one or many of these modes, since it is not possible otherwise to oppose. But the motion which is from a contrary is not contrary to that which tends to a contrary. Thus the motion from health is not contrary to the motion to disease, for it is one and the same. They have not, however, the same essence, as neither is it the same thing to be changed from health and to be changed into disease, nor is the motion from one contrary to that which is from another. For at the same time it would happen that the motion would be from a contrary and to a contrary, or to that which is intermediate. Concerning this, however, we shall speak hereafter. But the being changed to a contrary may appear to be the cause of contrariety, rather than the being changed from a contrary, for the one is a liberation from, but the other an assumption of, contrariety. And every motion is denominated rather from that into which it is changed, than from that from which it is changed. Thus that is called a becoming well, eugiansis, which tends to health, but a becoming ill, nosansis, which tends to disease. There remains therefore the motion which is to contraries, and that which is to contraries from contraries. Perhaps therefore it happens that the motions which are to contraries are also from contraries, but their essence perhaps is not the same. I mean, for instance, the motion to health, when referred to that which is from disease, and the motion from health referred to that which tends to disease. But since mutation differs from motion, for the mutation from a certain subject to a certain subject is motion, this being the case, the motion which is from a contrary to a contrary is contrary to that which is from a contrary to a contrary. Thus the motion which is from health to disease is contrary to the motion from disease to health. But it is manifest from induction what kind of things those appear to be which are contraries. For to become diseased is contrary to the being made well, and to learn is contrary to the being deceived, not through oneself, since they tend to contraries. For as science, so likewise deception may be obtained both through oneself and through another. Lation upward also is contrary to that which is downward, for these are contrary in length. And the motion to the right hand is contrary to that which is to the left, for these are contrary in breadth. The motion, too, which tends to the anterior part is contrary to that which tends to the posterior part, for these are contrary in depth. But the tendency which is to a contrary alone, is not motion, but mutation, such, for instance, as becoming to be white, but not from a certain thing. In things, however, to which there is not anything contrary, the mutation which is from the same is contrary to the mutation which is to the same. Hence, generation is contrary to corruption, and rejection to assumption, but these are mutations and not motions. The motions, however, to that which has an intermediate subsistence, between which being contraries something intervenes, are to be considered in a certain respect as tending to contraries. For motion uses that which is intermediate as a contrary, into whichever part it may be changed. For instance, from a dark brown to white, as from black, and from white to a dark brown, as to black, but from black to a dark brown, as to white. For the dark brown, which is a medium, is in a certain respect referred to each of the extremes, as was before observed. Motion, therefore, is thus contrary to motion, viz., the motion from a contrary to a contrary is contrary to that from a contrary to a contrary. Chapter 8. Since, however, not only motion but rest seems to be contrary to motion, this must be determined, for motion is simply contrary to motion, but rest is also opposed, for it is privation, and privation in a certain respect is said to be contrary. But what kind to what kind? For instance, is local rest contrary to local motion? But this is now simply asserted. For whether is the motion which is from this, or the motion which is to this, opposed to the permanency which is in this? But it is evident, since motion is in two subjects, that the permanency which is in this is opposed to the motion which is from this to a contrary, and that the permanency which is in a contrary is opposed to the motion which is from a contrary into this. At the same time, however, these permanencies or abidings are contrary to each other. For it would be absurd if motions are contrary, that the rests opposed to them should not also be contrary. But these rests and motions are in contrary terms. Thus the rest which is in health is opposed to the rest which is in disease, and to the motion from health to disease. For it is irrational to suppose that this rest is contrary to the motion which is from disease to health. For the motion to that in which it was established is rather arresting, so far as it happens to be at the same time produced with motion. But it is necessary that either this or that should take place. For the rest which is in whiteness is not contrary to the rest which is in health. But of such things as have not contraries, the mutation is indeed opposite, viz., the mutation from the same to the mutation to the same, but the motion is not. Thus the mutation from being is opposite to the mutation into being, and there is not a permanency of these, but immobility. And if indeed non-being were a certain subject, the immobility which is in being would be contrary to that which is in non-being. But if non-being is not anything, it may be doubted to what the immobility in being is contrary, and if it is rest. If, however, it be, either not all rest is contrary to motion, or generation and corruption will be motion. It is evident, therefore, that it must not be called rest, unless these also are called motions, but it must be denominated something similar, and immutability. But it is contrary either to nothing, or to that privation of mutation, which is in non-being, or to corruption. For this is from that, but generation into that. Chapter 9. It may, however, be doubted why permanencies and motions are in the mutation according to place, both according to and contrary to nature, but are not in other mutations. Thus, with respect to change in quality, one kind is according to, and another contrary to nature. For a tendency to health is not more according to or contrary to nature then a tendency to disease, nor a tendency to whiteness, then a tendency to blackness. The like also takes place in increase and diminution, for neither are these contrary to each other, as if by nature, or contrary to nature, nor increase to increase. And there is the same reasoning with respect to generation and corruption, for neither is generation according to nature, but corruption contrary to nature, since to grow old is according to nature. Nor do we see that generation is partly according and partly contrary to nature. If, however, that which is by violence is contrary to nature, the corruption which is violent will be contrary to that which is not violent, in the same manner as that which is contrary to that which is according to nature. There are therefore certain generations which are violent, and not fatal, to which those that are according to nature are contrary, and there are violent augmentations and diminutions, to which those according to nature are contrary, such as the augmentations of those who, through luxury, swiftly arrive at puberty, and corn which rapidly becomes ripe, and without constipation. But how does this take place in change according to quality? Shall we say after the same manner? For some of the changes will be violent, and others natural. Thus, some are liberated from disease, not in critical days, and others in critical days, of whom the former are changed in quality contrary to, and the latter according to, nature. But corruptions will be contrary to each other, and not to generation alone. And what should hinder? For this takes place in a certain respect, viz., if the one is pleasant and the other painful, so that corruption is not simply contrary to corruption, but so far as one of them is of this kind and the other of that. In short, therefore, motions and rests are contrary in the manner we have mentioned, as for instance the upward to the downward, for these are contrarieties of place. But fire is naturally borne along by that lation which tends upward, and earth by that which tends downward, and these lations are contrary. But fire is carried upward naturally, and downward unnaturally, and its natural motion is contrary to that which is unnatural. And permanencies in a similar manner, for permanency above is contrary to the motion from above to below. This permanency, however, would be to the earth contrary to nature, and that motion would be to it according to nature, so that permanency is contrary to motion, viz., the permanency which is contrary to nature, to the motion which is according to nature of the same thing. For the motion of the same thing is thus contrary, for one of them will be according to nature, which is upward or downward, but the other contrary to nature. There is, however, a doubt whether there is a generation of all rest which has not a perpetual subsistence, and whether this is to stand still. Of the rest, therefore, which abides contrary to nature, as of the rest of earth when on high, there will be a generation. Hence earth, when it is violently driven on high, will stand still, but that which is capable of standing still always appears to be borne along swifter, but on the contrary, that which is moved by violence. Hence, not having been made quiescent, it will be quiescent. Again, to stand still seems to be properly asserted of that which is naturally borne along to its own place, i.e., it either seems to be wholly this, or at least it at the same time happens to be so. But there is a doubt whether the permanency which is here is contrary to the motion which is here, for when a thing is moved from this, or abandons rest, it still appears to possess that which is abandoned, so that if this rest is contrary to the motion which is from hence to the contrary, contraries will be at the same time inherent. Or will it, in a certain respect, be at rest, or will it still abide? And in short, that which is in motion is partly here, and partly in that into which it changes. Hence motion is more than rest contrary to motion. And thus, concerning motion and rest, we have shown how each is one, and what those motions and rests are, which are contrary to each other. Some one, however, may doubt concerning standing still, whether any rest is opposed to such motions as are contrary to nature. It is absurd, therefore, if there will not be, for it abides but by violence, so that there will be something at rest which is not always at rest without the generation of rest. But it is evident that there will be, for as some thing may be moved contrary to nature, so also it may be at rest contrary to nature. Since, however, to some things there is a motion according to, and contrary to nature, as to fire a motion upward is according to nature, but downward contrary to nature, whether is this contrary, or the motion of earth? For this is borne downwards according to nature. Or is it not evident that both these motions are contrary, yet not after the same manner, but the one as that which is according to nature, to that which is according to nature? But the upward to the downward motion of fire is as a motion according to a motion contrary to nature. The like also must be said respecting permanencies. And thus, concerning motion and rest, we have shown how each is one, and what those motions and rests are, which are contrary to each other. End of Book 5. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.